I was not supposed to read the letter. If I had listened to my conscience, I would have put it back exactly where I found it. Closed the drawer, walked away, pretended I had never seen it. Instead, I broke the seal and destroyed my marriage, or maybe I saved it. I still do not know. The envelope was hidden beneath a stack of property records in my husband's study. Ordinary, unremarkable, easy to miss, except for the handwriting, my name, written across the front, and underneath it 7 words that changed everything. For the day after I am gone, gone, not away, not travelling, not dead, just gone. I remember staring at those words for a full minute, trying to convince myself they meant something else. A joke, a misunderstanding, anything. Because my husband was not dying, at least that is what I believed. He was 36, healthy, successful, the kind of man who never forgot birthdays, never missed appointments, and somehow always knew when I needed him before I did. 3 months earlier, I had married him. 3 months earlier, I had promised to spend the rest of my life with him. And 3 months earlier, he had already known a secret that would change everything. A secret he told everyone. Everyone except me. His doctors knew. His lawyer knew. Even his estate manager knew. I was his wife, and I found out last. The first line of the letter read, "If you are reading this sooner than I hoped, then I have made a terrible mistake. Welcome to MoonNoir. If you have ever loved someone who tried to protect you from the one thing you most needed to know, this story is for you. Subscribe and like if this is your first time here. Let us begin." I need to tell you about the 3 months before the letter, because the woman who found that envelope in the drawer was not the same woman who had walked into that marriage. And understanding who she had become in those 3 months explains why the letter broke her the way it did. I had not expected to fall in love with my husband. That sounds terrible. It was simply true. We had met through circumstances that were more practical than romantic, mutual connections. A shared professional world. 2 people who made sense on paper. I had liked him immediately. He was calm in the way that certain people were calm. Not the absence of feeling, the presence of someone who had learned to carry large things without showing the weight. I had found that quality attractive without fully understanding why. The first month of marriage was careful. 2 people learning the specific geography of a shared life. Which side of the bed, which coffee, which silences were comfortable, and which required filling. He was patient with all of it. Not in the way of someone performing patience, in the way of someone who genuinely was not in a hurry. That struck me as unusual. Most people in new relationships had a quality of wanting to get somewhere, to establish, to confirm. He simply seemed to want to be where he was, fully, without reservation. I remember the 2nd month more specifically. He began teaching me things. Not formally, simply in the course of ordinary days. How the household accounts worked. Which solicitor handled which documents. How to reach the estate manager if something needed attention. He showed me where important papers were kept, which accounts required my signature, how the investments were structured. I had assumed this was simply the responsible behaviour of a man who understood shared life required, shared deep knowledge. I had not yet considered the alternative. Then the small things began. One evening I came into the sitting room and found him standing at the bookshelf, not reading, not looking for anything, simply standing, looking at the photographs arranged along the middle shelf. Our wedding photographs, some older ones, his parents, a landscape from somewhere I did not recognize. He did not hear me come in. I watched him for a moment. His expression was not sad exactly. It was the expression of someone cataloguing something, storing it, the way you stored something you were afraid of losing. I cleared my throat. He turned, smiled, said nothing about what he had been doing. And I said nothing either, because I did not have language for what I had seen yet. A week later, his phone rang while we were having dinner. He glanced at the screen. Something moved across his expression. Very quickly, controlled almost immediately. He excused himself, took the call in the hallway, closed the door. I sat at the table and told myself it was nothing. Work, a colleague, an ordinary call taken privately for ordinary reasons. He came back 7 minutes later, apologized for the interruption, served himself more food, and changed the subject so smoothly that I almost did not notice he had changed it. Almost. Then there was the folder. I had gone to his study to leave a letter on his desk. The folder was open in the centre of the desk, a solicitor's name on the header that I did not recognise, papers I could not read from where I stood. He came into the room before I could look more closely. He did not close the folder quickly. That was what stayed with me afterward. He simply reached across the desk and closed it. The specific, unhurried quality of someone who was not trying to hide something, who had simply decided that something was finished. He asked if I needed anything. I said I was just leaving a letter. He thanked me. I left, and I stood in the hallway for a long moment afterward, telling myself I was imagining things, that I was looking for patterns in ordinary behaviour, because I was still learning him. That new marriages had a specific texture of uncertainty that felt like suspicion but was simply unfamiliarity. I told myself all of those things. I almost believed them. The 3rd month was when I started falling. Not dramatically, in the specific accumulated way that love actually arrived when it was real. The morning I woke at 3, unable to sleep, and found him already awake in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of tea and a book, not anxious, simply awake. He looked up when I came in. He did not ask if I was all right. He simply moved his book and made room at the table, and I sat beside him. In the specific, comfortable silence of someone who had found the right person to be quiet with. The evening, he remembered something I had mentioned once 3 weeks earlier. A small thing. A preference about something is insignificant, and he had simply arranged for it without mentioning that he remembered, without requiring acknowledgement, without making it a gesture, simply doing the thing because it mattered to me. And the afternoon I watched him from the hallway without his knowing. He was in the garden, moving slowly along the rose beds, touching each one with the specific gentle attention of someone who understood that growing things required patience. He looked up at the sky for a long moment. His expression was not peaceful exactly. It was the expression of someone memorizing something. I did not understand what I was seeing then. I understand now. He was memorizing the garden, the way it looked in that specific light, the way the roses moved in the wind, the way the afternoon felt. He was storing it, the way you stored something you were afraid of losing. I fell in love with him that afternoon, standing in a hallway watching a man memorize his garden. Not knowing yet what the memorizing meant, I thought he was teaching me how to be his wife. He was teaching me how to survive without him. The next morning, I acted as if nothing had happened. I made breakfast, poured coffee, asked whether he had slept well, and watched him carefully, because now I knew. Every smile, every plan, every ordinary moment was carrying the weight of a secret he thought he would take to the grave. For the first time since our wedding, I noticed how tired he looked when he thought nobody was watching, how his hand sometimes trembled before he hid it, how often he excused himself during conversations, how carefully he managed everyone's perception of him. He was not living. He was preparing to leave, and suddenly I hated him for it, not because he was dying, because he had decided I was not strong enough to know. That evening I waited until we were alone. Then I placed the letter on the table between us. The colour drained from his face. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, "Where did you find that?" The question hurt more than any confession. Not when did you read it? Not are you okay? Not even I am sorry. Just, where did you find that? Because he had never intended for me to know. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What stage? I asked. He closed his eyes. I asked again, quieter this time, not louder. The specific quiet of someone who needed the answer, but was not sure they were ready for it. What stage? He opened his eyes. He looked at me with the expression of a man who had been carrying something for a very long time and had finally arrived at the moment he could no longer carry it alone. Advanced, he said. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Aggressive. He said the second word more quietly than the first, as though saying it softer made it less true. The doctors are hopeful but realistic, words people used when they did not want to say the truth out loud. I sat with that for a long moment, not crying, not speaking, simply sitting with the specific feeling of understanding something before you are ready to understand it. He reached across the table. I did not take his hand. Not yet. What were you planning? I asked. He looked confused. I was planning to take care of you. No. My voice cracked. What were you planning for us? He had no answer, because there was no us. Not in his future, only me, safe, protected, provided for, alone. That realization broke me. Not the diagnosis. Not the fear. Not even the specific terrible word advanced, spoken softly across a kitchen table. The fact that he had already started saying goodbye, while I was still learning how to love him. The fact that every lesson, every document, every quietly arranged thing had been preparation, not partnership. He had been building me a life to live without him, and he had done it so carefully and so completely that I had almost mistaken it for love. It was love. That was the worst part. It was entirely love, and it had left no room for me inside it. For days we barely spoke about it, not because we were avoiding it, because once the truth entered a marriage, everything changed. Every conversation suddenly mattered. Every touch lasted a little longer. Every silence felt different. Then one night I discovered something worse than the letter. A locked wooden box, hidden behind books in his study. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them, each addressed to me, in his handwriting, for your 30th birthday, for the first Christmas after I am gone, for the day you sell the estate, for when you finally stop blaming yourself, when you fall in love again. I could not breathe, because these were not goodbye letters. were instructions for a life he expected me to live without him. A future he had already accepted, and that was the moment I made a decision. Not to save him. Not yet. Something much more important. I was going to make him want to stay, because deep down I understood the terrible truth. The illness was not the only thing killing him. Hopelessness had gotten there first, and if I had any chance of changing the ending, I had to fight that before I fought anything else. The next morning I walked into his study, carrying every letter I had found. I dropped them onto his desk. I looked him directly in the eye, and I said, "Pick one." He stared at me. "What?" "Pick one letter." Slowly he reached for an envelope. The one marked, "For the day you fall in love again." His hand froze halfway there. I saw it. The pain, the jealousy, the grief, the possibility. Then I said the words that changed everything. "Good, because if that letter ever gets opened, I want you sitting beside me when I read it." For the first time since his diagnosis, he cried. Not quietly, not with dignity. The kind of crying that came from carrying too much for too long, and for the first time since I found the truth, I held him where he fell apart. That night became the beginning of everything. Not recovery, not miracles. Hope. If this story is moving, you drop a comment and tell me which moment hit you hardest. I read every single one. Now let us continue. The following weeks were different. He no longer hid his appointments. I went with him. He no longer lied about his symptoms. I learned them. He no longer pretended tomorrow did not matter. Because now someone was planning to be there. Months passed. Some days were beautiful. Others were brutal. There were emergency hospital visits, bad scans, long nights. Fear that sat between us at dinner. Fear that followed us into bed. Fear that woke us both at 3 a.m. But fear was no longer making decisions. Love was. One afternoon I caught him staring at the garden through the library window. "What are you thinking about?" He smiled. "The roses. The roses. They will bloom next spring." I waited. Then he said softly, "I do not think I have allowed myself to think about next spring in a very long time." And I realized that was the first victory. Not a medical one, a human one. Weeks later, we began opening some of the letters together. Not because we needed them, because we needed to understand the man who had written them. The first letter made me laugh. The second made me cry. The third made us both cry. One contained instructions for fixing a broken sink because he knew I would refuse to call a plumber. Another contained a recipe he had never taught me. One simply said, "If you are reading this, please stop pretending you do not miss me and eat something." I laughed so hard I nearly fell out of my chair. Then I cried anyway, because every letter was proof of how much he loved me, and how little he had expected to stay. A year passed, against the odds, against predictions, against expectations, not because the illness disappeared, because we stopped measuring life only by what might be lost. We began measuring it by what remained. One rainy afternoon I found him in the study. The wooden box was open, letters scattered across the desk. He was reading them, one after another, the versions of himself who had already surrendered, a man he barely recognized anymore. When he noticed me, he lifted one envelope. I barely recognized the man who wrote these. I walked closer. Why? He looked around the room, at the home we had built, at the photographs on the shelves, at the future he had never thought he would see. Then he said quietly, "Because that man thought the story was over. For the first time, I truly believed we might survive this. Not the illness, the fear." The next spring arrived. The roses bloomed, every single one. I caught him staring at them again. This time he was smiling. No sadness, no longing, just gratitude. That evening we sat on the porch together. The sky painted gold by sunset, and he finally told me the truth. He had never spoken aloud. "I did not marry you because I was dying. I turned toward him. I married you because I was in love with you. My breath caught. I knew I might lose everything." He took my hand, "But I could not bear losing the chance to love you first." Years later, the wooden box still existed, tucked away safely. Most of the letters remained unopened, not because we forgot them, because life refused to follow the script he had written. One winter evening, I opened the box looking for an old photograph. At the very bottom, I discovered an envelope I had never seen before, hidden beneath all the others, addressed in his familiar handwriting, "For the day we realize we won." My hands shook. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, one sentence, just one. "If you are reading this beside me, then this is the only letter that ever mattered." A laugh broke through my tears. I looked up. Across the room, he was sitting in his favourite chair, older now, silver beginning to touch his hair, reading a book, alive. He noticed me staring. "What?" I smiled. "Nothing." And for the first time in a very long time, neither of us was afraid of tomorrow. Take a moment with that. If you made it this far, tell me, which moment broke your heart? Mine was the moment I understood. He was not teaching her how to be his wife. He was teaching her how to survive without him. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. The next one is already waiting. MoonNoir app laid.